Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've posted over 100 excerpts from some of my more than 250 American montage shows that I did in the 1980s and 90s while at UPI Radio. Recently, I embarked on a fresh series of shows, and here's the second half of one of my new American montage interviews. Welcome back. My guest this week is disc jockey Don Wardell, who spent much of his earlier career in the recording industry. And he tells me now and then he would be assigned to work with artists who turned out to be a real surprise personally.
Somebody came up to me and said, we've had a meeting and we'd like you to work with Grace Slick, who at this time had been in the Jefferson Airplane and had a sort of a drug reputation and an unpleasant reputation. And I said, well, I don't think we're entirely matched, but let's give it a shot. Well, she and I became so close. She is a wonderful woman.
I would not have thought that.
No, well, neither would I. But if she was here right now, you would be enchanted with this woman. She was in recovery at this point, and I think people who are in recovery have things going for them that other people don't, and they have certain insight into their behavior.
Well, I think many of them have gone to the edge of the cliff and looked down and thought, I better turn around.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But she was, and so easy to deal with and so open to suggestions that she was just wonderful.
Tell us about your role in preserving the past in music. There are two big projects. Let's talk about the Elvis one second.
Sure.
The first one, if I'm not mistaken, was your involvement with the Dorseys and Sinatra.
Mm-hmm.
What was the scope of that project, and what was the upshot of it?
Well, the scope, Sinatra was the vocalist with the Dorsey Band from 40 to 42. And he had, during that time, recorded 53 78s. And they were scattered to the wind. And a guy called Alan Dell in England had reassembled them, and they had been forgotten. You know, there was a sudden re-interest in Sinatra. We hit on this but and I went to various people at RCA and said, look, if we find this and we find this missing one here and do this and do that, we can put this wonderful thing together. So a very high person in RCA once told me, Don, never ask for permission, do it, and no one will ever stop you. And this turned out to be the truth. So I thought, well, I've been diddling around now for 5 weeks getting this tapes and so on. I think we'll just go right ahead and put out a 6-album set. Nobody said a word. And then it won a Grammy.
Well, now, when you're working with music from the early 40s, before we knew much about magnetic recording tape by invading the German radio headquarters,
yes,
the originals were on disc.
Yes.
So we're dealing with material that might not have been in the greatest shape.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So in the age before, and now I should tell listeners, you may have seen it on some of the crime scene reconstructions where you will see a wavy line they put on a monitor. You can get down to 1,000th of a second now, take out a click, take the other 1,000th and repeat it so everything stays in sync. You didn't have that back then.
Well, there was a system in San Francisco called No Noise, and you could run your repertoire through No Noise. However, it was like an elephant standing on a pancake. It took out all the highs and it took out all the lows.
Well, and for the layman, I must add here that some of that noise is in the middle of where you're singing. And if you overdo it, all of a sudden everything starts sounding abnormal like this.
And dead.
And dead, yeah. It almost sounds like old AM radio tapes you hear, or a wire recording from the late 40s. So you use some of the no noise to clean these?
I didn't think we used no noise on Sinatra. I've done so many I can't remember. I don't think, but that was available to us.
But it must have been for the RCA engineers, who I will say were at the time some of the best in the country, a labor of love to try to clean these discs up.
Exactly. And there'd been a motion picture called That's Entertainment. I'm sure you recall it. That subsequently became 1, 2, and 3 That's Entertainment. And this lit some kind of forest fire in American catalog. We're very much, and I say this as a new American, we're very much a throwaway society. here today, gone tomorrow. And after that's entertainment, it was a consciousness-raising thing. Look, there are things that have gone before that are really quite remarkable. We own them. We're not doing anything with them. Let's look into it.
Isn't this always the way it happens? Whenever the American Film Institute, the AFI, for example, puts out the 100 best films, they tend to overlook the silent movies.
Mm-hmm.
Because who's alive today that really remembers
to go to bat for them?
Right. And so the people who made the loudest noises recently are the ones who usually get honored. We were talking before going on the air about my love of old-time radio, and then we talk here about the BBC's great love of radio, the human voice, the hundreds of thousands of hours of radio that were lost.
Yes.
For one thing, a lot of the shows that were all done live were never recorded unless the sponsor wanted a copy. During World War II, we were lucky because they started printing these little flimsy, they were called V-discs,
yes,
which they could send out to the troops to play on a little Victrola. And a lot of those came back from the war. So we have Bob Hope's wartime
Yes, we
shows,
do.
that kind of thing. But you're right. How much of that... Of course, some of it's deteriorated. They say that 50% of the movies ever made have fallen apart, a lot of the nitrate from early on. But, boy, I hear you play music, and you can hear the, surface noise. But who cares? But I don't know about you. You're so older than I am, but I grew up listening to highly compressed AM radio, and if that noise isn't there, it doesn't sound right.
I was listening to an Ella thing maybe last Sunday, and as you know, when you work in radio, you wear headphones, and I thought, good heavens, I can hear her lip noise. Lip noise is just that when you've got a kind
or
of
the
a dry
fretting on
lip.
a guitar in the new CDs. I don't want to hear all that.
I could hear it. This was of course off tape. So anyway, there was a rekindling of things of yesteryear.
Mm-hmm. I remember one of my favorite records, I just played the holy heck out of it in radio, was called Concerto Electro by the great keyboard artist Dick Hyman.
Mm.
And I, about 4 or 5 years ago, wanted to have a fresh copy. I couldn't find the old CD. It probably is the old 33. It was probably unplayable anyway. I had to go on the internet. I had to look on eBay. And it's one of the greatest little one-of-a-kind albums I think anybody put out. It has 30 or 40 different themes that are great for commercials and things on it. And I had to sweat blood just to find a copy. Finally, somebody in Rancho Cucamonga, California, had a copy of it. And I paid through the nose for it. But you go to thrift stores, and you think for every 33 that's in a thrift store, how many million of these got thrown out by people who say, I know these are grandma's records. What the heck are these things? Bingo, there they go.
Right.
Sad.
Very, very.
So this Grammy, did you win the Grammy by yourself?
No, 3 people.
3 people. But still you won a Grammy.
Yes.
I never won a Grammy.
Alan Dell, Ethel Gabriel. Ethel is a marvelous woman. She was really one of the first women in the recording industry. It wasn't a very hospitable place for women. And I said, Ethel, how do you do this? And she said, I just forgot that I was a woman and did a job. And I think when most successful women, you can look at them and say, yeah, they're not carting their femininity around.
No, nor using it.
No.
Yeah. Well, the other restoration I want to talk about is Elvis.
Yes. Well,
I was impressed that you went to his home, and they gave you his hometown, and Tupelo gave you the keys to the city.
Yes, they did.
Tell us about that.
Well, to really understand Elvis Presley, you can go to Graceland. It's the second most visited private home in America after the White House. But you really need to go down to Tupelo. It's about 150 miles away. And there is the house where Elvis was born. Vernon and Gladys were his parents. And he had a twin, Jesse Garin, who died at birth. And the people of Tupelo moved the house to Elvis Presley Park, and they built a chapel alongside it, and thousands of people get married in that chapel every year. And you will understand far more about Elvis Presley on a visit to this tiny town of Tupelo than you will walking the stairs of Graceland forever. You'll understand the roots, the poverty, and what was almost forced upon this Southern family. The glare of America from people. The house is called a shotgun house. It goes from here to there, and you can fire a gun through it. It's tiny, and they had nothing, and they were pitched into the spotlight. And you get all of this when you go to Tupelo. You don't get it in Graceland.
I'm sure psychologists have done a lot about this, but the amount of art that has come from poverty. You look, for example, I mean, the only person who really comes to mind straight away as far as being erudite and musical was Cole Porter.
Thank you.
From my native Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother's maiden name was Porter, and they always claimed that I was his third cousin removed twice or something. I don't know, but I do know that when my Aunt Pauline was in college, she was the only one in my mother's family early on to go to college. She came home and she told my grandfather, who was a blacksmith, "This guy wants me to get engaged." And my grandfather was apparently pleased and said, "Well, what's he? Oh, he's studying law." Wow, law. And then my Aunt Pauline made the mistake of informing my grandfather that he was going to drop out of law school to pursue his career in music, and my grandfather convinced my Aunt Pauline to dump Hoagie Carmichael. Or I might have been Hoagie's nephew.
Right.
I never know. But the whole southern aspect of gospel music, in a way.
Yes.
The great story about the guy, I don't know what recording company, who had an early tape recorder in the trunk of his car and drove around the South and found the jazz musician Huddie Ledbetter in a prison somewhere and recorded him. There's just something about that bottom level part of just getting by that has been the catalyst, I think, for an enormous amount of arts and theater.
Yes, and then something happens. Greatness is forced upon you, and what that does to the family unit, and what, of course, it eventually did to Elvis. It was a tremendous burden, and it killed him.
Yeah. What all did you do at RCA for the Elvis collection?
Well,
what brought you down there?
Bob Summer, who was the president of RCA, first of all, there had been a court case that had gone on for maybe 4 or 5 years with everybody fighting. And the fights were between the Elvis Presley estate, RCA Victor, and Colonel Parker. And during that time, nothing was issued. Nothing was released. The court case was resolved, and everybody, the Elvis catalog was sold back to RCA before 1972 or 3, and Elvis earned off 73 through 77, which were the declining years. Bob Summer, who was the president of RCA, said, "I'm going to put you in charge of this. This is going to be a tightrope because there's a lot of bad blood between the Presleys, Priscilla, us, the record company, and Colonel Parker, and I want it stopped, and I want us to get on with the show."
Those are pretty big marching orders.
Yes. So I went to talk to Priscilla. The judge had already ruled, but we all knew now where our thrones were, if you were. We were the record company, she was the estate, Colonel Parker was out of the picture completely. So I went to talk to Priscilla, and I said, we need a plan. We need a plan. We need to... What had happened over the years is that any time a record division of RCA ran out of money, they would put out an Elvis Presley record. Now they would be a hodgepodge, an unbelievable hodgepodge of movie things or whatever. But this would go on in Rio and in Germany, and it would go on in South America and blah, blah, blah.
So it was just a dump of his tapes, more or less. They just throw whatever
the logic,
fit on a
the
33.
logic of a recorded career has been lost.
Yes.
So, first of all, an edict was given, which upset feathers from here to Rio de Janeiro. There will be no more Elvis Presley releases from any RCA subsidiary unless it is signed off by the president of the company. So we got peace. We didn't suddenly get a thing called double features where they slapped together two movies, and we didn't get Elvis Sings for Children. It was stopped. Now that had been stopped, the thing was, in the middle, what are we going to do? So we decided to restore everything as it was from the very first Elvis Presley album, with the right artwork and the right label, and if it was mono, it was mono. If it was stereo, it was compatible. Huge, huge, huge task. 2 people came on board who were wonderful. Roger Seaman in London and Ernst Jorgensen from Denmark. They live and breathe Elvis Presley. And I administered this whole thing, and slowly but surely we restored it. And when I left, unfortunately, it had begun to break down because companies were short of money in Rio, and they started with their compilations again.
Bring back the cash cow.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but it ended up to be, what was the final product of all of this? You said it was how many?
Well, what we were able to do by doing all this research, we found out that he was entitled to what he had never had, 100 gold and platinum records, that they had sold that much through territories and this and that. And then we had a big unveiling in the racquetball court at Graceland of the 100 gold and platinum records. So that's what it ended up as. And a core catalog now, you can actually buy it. I think it's $500 of everything he ever did in mono, if it's mono, in stereo and quad, and it's all right.
Don't you hate the people who tried to make fake stereo out of mono? Reminds me of an old car where we had reverb chambers in the back with springs in the trunk. You know?
I know.
Don, a couple of other quick things. I didn't realize that Ella Fitzgerald had done, over a period of years, different songbooks of different composers.
Yes.
How many of those did she do? Do you know?
9.
9.
Started out with Cole Porter, went to Rodgers and Hart, went to Duke Ellington, Berlin, the Gershwins, which was 5 12-inch albums, onto Mercer, Kern, and one other I'm forgetting. Yeah, but they were remarkable.
Yeah, I didn't really understand Ella until about the last 10 years. I don't know why. Never got into what she did. I thought maybe it was a little too stylized because I really didn't understand that off-pitch scat edge that she would put on a lot of things. So if you don't understand it, it sounds as if it's gimmickry. But my God, what a performer.
Yes.
Even in her later years.
Yes, she kept going. And all on a handshake. You know, that's the thing that I think is one of the most remarkable things. Her manager was Norman Granz. He founded jazz at the Philharmonic. He insisted that people sit down and listen to jazz. He insisted that the audience be integrated, which was quite an issue in those days.
Yes.
And if he couldn't stay in the same hotel as Ella and Louis, he wouldn't, Ella and Louis had to be in the same hotel as Norman Granz at a time when they would resist, particularly on tours of the South, letting 2 black people stay there. And the classic thing about Norman was nobody went backstage during a Norman Granz jazz at the Philharmonic. Nobody. It was written in cement. And one day Norman was backstage and he saw out of the corner of his eye 2 people who were obviously cops, and this is why Norman ruled on this. The 2 people were obviously cops heading to Ella's dressing room because they were going to plan something. So he stood in the doorway and said, "You're going to have to kill me."
Wow.
And I think that's the...
Well, the stories are legendary about the planting of something, drugs, contraband, whatever. You may have heard the story about Orson Welles, that he's out having supper one time early in his career when everybody thought, because of the avant-garde work the Mercury Theater was doing, because he did an all-black Macbeth or one of the Shakespearean plays, that he had to be a communist. And so this officer comes over to him and says, "Mr. Welles, don't go back to your hotel room." They had a naked underage girl in his bed and photographers ready to walk in. And he never went back that night.
How
but he had
fortunate
enough friends, to tip him off. So, and the stories of black performers who had to stay in somebody's home, yet would be the starring bill on a thing. The great stories of Jack Benny, who would not take the cast somewhere if they wouldn't let Rochester stay there. So some people along the line tried to strike a blow for liberty, but they weren't always able to do it.
No. It's remarkable what we've lived through. It's been in our lifetime, too.
Yeah. What do you think of when I say Jerome Kern?
I think of turn of the century nostalgia. I think of lyrics like, "All the things you are mine." I just think that,
The first time as a child, I heard "All the Things You Are." And the reason I ask is I use it when I'm talking to young people who don't play an instrument. I said, the next time you see a piano, stop and look at it, and look at the white keys and the black keys. Things like Yankee Doodle Went to Town are all in the white keys. But you are the precious glow of evening, da-da. All the excitement and all the things you are is on the accidentals. It's on the sharps and flats. And it is not only my favorite song, it's the song I use to explain to kids where the magic in music is.
He's extraordinary. He's one of the
yeah, and he's a white Russian. Was he Russian? Gershwins were. What was
the Gershwins?
I'm just thinking. Here's a guy.
Gershwin's father came from Russia.
Here's a guy who wrote Old Man River. You know. I mean,
well, this is the remarkable thing about the Great American Songbook, that the Gershwins, Berlin, who was Izzy Berlin, Cole Porter, of course, was American aristocracy, but Kern and so on and so forth. They were all from a different country, and they had to come here and absorb the country and then write in idiom.
Right.
They didn't write "the cat sat on the mat."
No.
They wrote "all the things you are mine." Can you imagine?
Don, the clock is eating us up. Let me ask you one final thing.
Yeah.
What would you say to a parent who has a child who's showing an interest in music, dance, the arts, whatever, particularly music, in an age where they don't have it in school anymore, where kids don't hear anything but beats and chanting, to try to provide some place where that child can discover all the things you are?
Yeah, I would say to them, part of who you, the parent, are has been made up through wonderful poets, if you will. I consider lyrics poetry, and any form of exposure that you can just leave around. Now, remember, these are overwhelming odds because they're looking at Beyonce, and they're looking at so-called fame, and they're looking at dance, which somehow got into music, which I don't quite understand how that ever happened. It wouldn't be all right to be Ella anymore, to walk out in a gown and sing Manhattan if she didn't have 6 people behind her. But I would say expose them to it. Because everything is a cycle. It will come back. It will come back.
There'll never be another Anthony Newley, but music will come back. Don Wardell, thanks a lot. We could go on for a very long time.
Wonderful.
Thanks for talking music with us.
Not at all. Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this interview from my new American Montage series. Check out YouTube for more. I'm Dennis Daly.